When a chosen one stops trying to prove their worth, the whole world suddenly realizes how unprepared it is for their power. That's the energy we're stepping into today. Because let's be honest, the moment you stopped explaining yourself, stopped shrinking, stopped dimming, and stopped negotiating with people who never deserved access in the first place, that's when everything shifted. Not because you changed, but because everyone finally had to face the truth they'd been dodging like it was a gym membership renewal. You cannot be beat. And here's a fact that makes this even more poetic. Psychologists have found that people often underestimate the quietest individual in the room because the human brain is wired to mistake subtlety for softness. But in reality, subtle people are usually the ones running 10 steps ahead. And in your case, let's be real, you weren't 10 steps ahead. You were in a different building entirely, sipping spiritual tea, watching them play checkers on your old level. Your story has been one long collection of people misreading you, mishandling you, misjudging you, and thinking they were the ones in control. They approached you with egos, strategies, and tricks, like they were auditioning for a role in a psychological thriller. Meanwhile, you were walking in alignment, intuition, and divine timing. They were playing a game. You were fulfilling a calling. They never realized you were the plot twist. Every time they thought they had you figured out, you evolved. Every time they tried to corner you, you transcended. Every time they planned your downfall, you upgraded. And by the time their plans hit the ground, you weren't even standing in the same timeline anymore. That's why they found out the hard way, painfully, embarrassingly, and unexpectedly, that you're not someone who can be defeated, outsmarted, replaced, or replicated. You're the type that life prepares in secret and reveals in power. You are the reason some people's victory laps ended in sprained ankles. You are the reason their alliances crumbled like poorly made jollof. You are the lesson they didn't study for, but still had to take the test on. So today's message isn't about revenge, ego, or proving points. It's about truth. The truth they discovered too late. A chosen one can be underestimated, misunderstood, doubted, betrayed, and attacked, but never defeated. Settle in. What's coming next is revelation. Number 1, they tried to break you, only to discover you were built from what breaks other people. People thought the pressure you went through would crush you, silence you, or make you disappear. They assumed the weight you were carrying was too much for any normal person to survive. What they didn't realize was that nothing about you has ever been normal. You were shaped in a way they've never seen before. The very storms that tear people apart are the same storms that molded your character, sharpened your mind, and strengthened your spirit. The funny part is how confidently some of them expected your collapse. They were waiting for you to lose control, lose direction, or lose yourself. Some secretly counted the days. Others pretended to care while quietly hoping to see you struggle. What they didn't know is that your foundation was built long before they even entered your life. You weren't standing because of them. You were standing in spite of them. Every pressure turned into another layer of strength. Every setback trained you to rise with more clarity. You learned to rebuild yourself without an audience, heal without applause, and grow without guidance. That kind of strength is rare, and it frustrates people who believe they know your breaking point better than you do. The truth is, you don't fall apart under intensity. You become more focused. You don't weaken under emotional attacks. You become wiser. And you don't crumble under loss. You become more decisive about what you deserve. You're not powered by ease. You're powered by resilience. That's why their attempts to shake you only revealed how much you've already endured. Some of them tried to use your pain against you. Others tried to exaggerate your flaws. But every tactic they used ended up proving something they didn't intend. You're not someone who folds. You're someone who transforms. You walked out of situations that were supposed to leave you broken, but instead they left you unshakable. They learned the hard way that your strength isn't just a trait, it's your structure. You're made of the very things other people run from, and that's why you can't be beat. Number 2, their biggest miscalculation was confusing your humility with helplessness. They watched you move through life quietly, carefully, almost like you were bending to their rules, and they believed they had the upper hand. They mistook your patience for passivity, your calm for weakness, and your restraint for an inability to fight back. Every small act of humility they witnessed, every moment you chose not to engage in their chaos, they recorded as a sign that you were manageable. They thought they could push, manipulate, and control you because you didn't immediately respond with the intensity they expected. What they didn't understand is that humility doesn't mean helplessness. It doesn't mean surrender. It doesn't mean a lack of awareness or a lack of power. You've learned to hold yourself in a way that doesn't require validation, and that's terrifying for people who survive on control. They assumed that because you weren't reacting the way they wanted, they had space to dominate. They underestimated the quiet confidence that runs underneath your every choice. While they were busy flexing their influence, you were mastering yours. While they were showing off their strength in small, temporary victories, you were quietly gathering insight, refining strategy, and building a foundation that no one could shake. They never saw it coming because they were looking for a fight on their terms, expecting the world to match their intensity. They failed to recognize that you operate on a completely different level. Their miscalculation was fatal. They assumed humility is weakness, and that assumption made them careless. They didn't prepare for the truth that someone who walks with quiet dignity is not a person who bends, but someone who observes, learns, and acts at the exact right moment. Every time they tried to push, prod, or provoke, you absorbed, assessed, and evolved. They believed they were winning by testing your patience, but you were winning by proving that strength isn't loud and power isn't reactive. By the time they realized the difference, it was too late. They discovered that humility in a chosen one isn't a shield. It's a secret weapon. You weren't helpless at all. You were untouchable in ways they could never understand. Their biggest mistake was thinking they were in control, when in reality, they were just fueling the rise of someone they would never beat. Number 3, you became their downfall because you exposed their character without ever exposing them. They never saw it coming. All their schemes, their manipulations, their whispers behind closed doors, and their attempts to control you were being reflected back in ways they didn't anticipate. You didn't need to confront them, call them out, or attack them publicly. Simply by being yourself, by holding your integrity and refusing to compromise your truth, you exposed who they really were. Every lie they told, every attempt to twist reality, every moment of jealousy or envy became more visible simply because your clarity and authenticity made the contrast impossible to ignore. People often confuse confrontation with power, but real power doesn't always make noise. They thought they were in control because they could influence the environment around you. They didn't understand that by maintaining your composure and sticking to your principles, you were quietly shining a light on their weaknesses. You became the lens that reflected their flaws, their insecurities, and their limitations. Without you saying a word, everyone could see the real version of them, the version that thrives on manipulation, the version that pretends, the version that thought it could bend others to its will. The more they tried to hide, the more your presence revealed. They acted with arrogance, believing their power would overshadow your influence. But in reality, it only drew attention to the cracks in their character. You didn't have to be aggressive, loud, or vengeful. You didn't need to prove yourself. simply living in alignment with your principles, stepping into your own life unapologetically, and refusing to participate in their chaos, made their true colors undeniable. By the time they realized what was happening, it was already too late. People around them began noticing the disconnect between their image and their reality. Their credibility eroded, their control slipped, and their influence waned, all because you refused to compromise, and all because your integrity did the work for you. Without ever exposing them directly, you became the reason they couldn't hide. You became the truth they tried to escape, and that's a power they'll never recover from. Number 4, they threw you to the fire and discovered you don't burn. You become the flame. They were so sure the pressure would swallow you whole. They believed the chaos they created would cloud your judgment, drain your spirit, and make you crumble under the weight of everything happening around you. They expected the heat to leave you exhausted, desperate, or at the very least weakened. What they didn't expect was that you would walk straight through it and come out stronger, wiser, and more grounded than before. Every challenge they sent your way only sharpened your instincts. Every attempt to overwhelm you became another lesson in emotional intelligence. They didn't understand that you don't fear intensity, you adapt to it. When life gets loud, you become more centered. When things fall apart, you become more focused. And when people try to shake you, your sense of direction becomes clearer than ever. Chaos doesn't confuse you, it trains you. They kept waiting for your breaking point, but all they kept seeing was your breakthrough. Instead of losing yourself, you found parts of yourself you didn't even know were there. Instead of shrinking, you expanded. Instead of retreating, you rebuilt. It wasn't because you had something to prove. It's because your spirit is wired to evolve under pressure. That's what they misjudged. They were fighting someone who gained strength from the very obstacles meant to destroy them. By the time they realized what was happening, the tables had already turned. They were waiting for your downfall, but they couldn't survive the same heat they tried to put you through. They underestimated the way you grow in dark seasons, the way you rise after difficult moments, and the way you reinvent yourself after every setback. You didn't just walk through the fire untouched. You walked out glowing. The heat that was supposed to break you ended up activating you. They didn't lose because you fought back. They lost because they never understood the truth. You don't burn in the fire. You become the flame that outshines everything they used against you. Number 5, your spirit terrifies them because it performs at a level their ego can't compete with. They were used to dealing with people who needed validation to feel powerful, people who required applause, agreement, or attention before they could move confidently. Their whole sense of worth depended on how many eyes were watching and how many voices were praising. That's why they couldn't understand you. You moved with a level of calm, clarity, and certainty that had nothing to do with outside approval. You were grounded in something internal, something earned, something stable, and that's exactly what unsettled them. Your spirit wasn't built through popularity. It was built through seasons where nobody saw you, supported you, or celebrated you. You learned to navigate challenges on your own. You learned to trust your intuition, your resilience, and your connection to something higher. While they needed an audience to feel important, you grew stronger in the dark, in the quiet, and in the struggle. That kind of strength is intimidating to people who are fueled by ego, because ego needs constant feeding, while spirit needs only alignment. You don't have to announce your progress, brag about your abilities, or prove anything to anyone. Your growth shows in the way you carry yourself. Your power shows in your discipline. Your confidence shows in your consistency. They can't compete with that because their entire structure collapses without attention, while you remain steady even without recognition. Every time they tried to shake you, provoke you, or get a reaction, all they got was your composure. Your lack of response told them everything they feared. You don't operate on their level. You don't get pulled into petty battles. You don't chase meaningless victories. You don't entertain anything that disrupts your peace. That terrifies them, because ego needs conflict to feel alive, but your spirit stays strong even in silence. They eventually realized they couldn't destabilize you because you're not plugged into the same system they are. Their ego rises and falls with attention. Your spirit rises and settles with purpose. And the moment they saw that difference, they understood why they could never beat you. Your foundation is built in places their ego will never reach. Number 6, you're unbeatable because your wins don't come from strategy. They come from alignment. They spent so much time building plans, forming alliances, and creating little backstage schemes, thinking that life is only moved by tactics and human effort. They relied on manipulation, gossip, and influence like tools they could pull out whenever they needed an advantage. Everything they did was calculated, rehearsed, and fueled by fear of losing control. They thought that because they had more people, more noise, or more connections, they automatically had the upper hand. What they failed to understand is that none of those things matter when someone is divinely aligned. Your success doesn't come from plotting or competing. It doesn't come from tricking people or bending situations to fit your desires. Your wins flow because you move with clarity and timing that isn't based on ego. It's based on purpose. You don't chase opportunities. They find you. You don't beg for doors to open. They're opened for you at the exact moment you're ready. And that's something strategy can never outplay. Alignment isn't loud, but it's unstoppable. What confuses people is how your victories look effortless, even though they come from years of inner work, discipline, and spiritual preparation. They see the results, but not the surrender it took. They see the glow, but not the growth. They see the elevation, but not the alignment behind it. They assume you're lucky or favored in a way that isn't fair, but the truth is deeper. You're moving with guidance they can't imitate and support they can't see. While they are busy trying to force outcomes, you simply follow the pull in your spirit. While they panic over timing, you trust yours. While they manipulate to get ahead, you align with what's meant for you. And because of that, you always end up in places their strategies can't reach. You meet people you didn't scheme for, receive blessings you didn't hustle for, and walk into seasons you didn't have to fight dirty to enter. Eventually they realized something humbling. You can't beat someone who's not relying on their own strength. Strategy may win battles, but alignment wins destinies. And that's why every time they try to outthink you, they end up outplayed by the very path you were destined to walk. Number 7. They weaponized your past and forgot you already outgrew the person they're fighting. They kept trying to drag you back into chapters you've already closed, as if reminding you of who you used to be would somehow disarm you. They assumed the old triggers would still trigger you, the old wounds would still weaken you, and the old insecurities would still hold you hostage. What they didn't realize is that the version of you they're attacking hasn't existed in a long time. You didn't just move forward. You transformed so deeply that even you barely recognize the person you used to be. They thought bringing up your past would slow you down, but your past is where you learned your strength. They thought throwing your old mistakes in your face would embarrass you, but those mistakes are the very reason you became wiser, calmer, and more spiritually grounded. They thought your history was your weakness, but it became your training ground. Every difficult season, every heartbreak, every misstep, every failure only built more self-awareness, emotional maturity, and confidence within you. They underestimated how much you have evolved. They assumed you were still the version who tolerated disrespect, who didn't know their worth, who accepted bare minimum, who explained themselves too much, or who didn't trust their intuition. They kept swinging at a person you no longer are. Every attack they aimed at your old self missed because you've outgrown the level where those tactics worked. Their strategies weren't outdated. Their entire perception of you was. You didn't just evolve slowly. You reinvented yourself powerfully. You upgraded your mindset, healed emotionally, gained clarity, and discovered a strength that cannot be manipulated. The person they're trying to fight doesn't live in your spirit anymore. They're arguing with your past while you're negotiating with your destiny. They're trying to pull you backward while you're being pulled forward by purpose. By the time they realized this, the battle was already over. You weren't even standing on the same ground anymore. They were confronting the ghost of who you used to be, while you were already living in the next level of your life. And that's why they can't beat you. You're not who they remember. You're someone they never prepared for. Number 8, they couldn't beat you because you never needed their approval to access your power. They spent so much time thinking that influence, applause, and recognition were the ultimate measures of strength. They assumed that to succeed, to be seen, or to hold power, you had to earn their approval, or at least try to fit into their expectations. They didn't realize that your strength never depended on anyone's validation. Your power isn't borrowed from other people's opinions. It's born from conviction, self-mastery, and knowing your own worth. People who rely on external approval crumble when the crowd turns silent. They falter when attention shifts away. They panic when their moves aren't celebrated. You, on the other hand, aren't built that way. You operate from a source that no one can take away. Your decisions, your growth, and your victories exist first, in alignment with your purpose, not in alignment with what others want to see. You don't perform for recognition. You act from a level of certainty that can't be shaken. Every time they tried to influence you, manipulate your choices, or provoke you into reacting, they failed because your power doesn't come from their perception. Their noise, their pressure, their criticism, it doesn't destabilize you. Their attempts to control outcomes fall flat because you're guided by clarity and conviction, not by applause or validation. While they need others to confirm their victories, you simply move in accordance with what's true for you, and that alone is enough. That's why you rise higher every time. Their tactics work on people who feed off recognition, but they can't touch someone who feeds off purpose. Their attempts to intimidate or undermine you only highlight the gap between their reliance on external approval and your self-sufficient power. Their frustration grows because they can't bend you with the same tools they use on everyone else. They learned too late that the moment someone operates independently of approval, they become untouchable. You weren't competing with them for their acceptance. You were competing with destiny, and destiny doesn't ask anyone to cheer. That's why, no matter what they tried, they couldn't beat you. You were never in their system to begin with. Number 9. The more they tried to control you, the more you became a mirror of their weakness. They kept pushing, pressuring, and testing you because they were used to people folding under their influence. They relied on manipulation, intimidation, and emotional games to get their way. It worked on everyone else until they reached you. You weren't confused by their tactics. You didn't take their bait. You didn't bend, break, or shrink to fit the role they wanted you to play. And that alone shook them to their core. You were the first person who saw right through them without even trying. Your strength revealed the exact spots where their confidence was fake. Your boundaries highlighted how often they crossed their own. Your calmness made their need for control look desperate. Every time they tried to dominate you, they ended up exposing how little control they actually had over themselves. People who depend on power play dynamics hate facing someone they cannot move, someone who cannot be emotionally manipulated, someone who isn't triggered by their tone, their silence, or their pressure. They get frustrated because it forces them to see the truth. Their power only exists when the other person allows it. When you didn't play into their script, Their entire sense of superiority started falling apart. You didn't have to argue with them or confront them to show their flaws. Simply by staying grounded, you made it clear that their usual tactics were ineffective, and that was enough to reveal everything. Their insecurity, their fear, their lack of emotional control, it all surfaced when their attempts to overpower you failed. They weren't losing to your strength, they were losing to their own reflection. They realized you weren't the fragile one. They were. You weren't the unstable one. They were. You weren't the one who lacked control. They were. You held up a mirror without ever intending to, and it showed them exactly who they had been hiding from. That's why they couldn't stand you, couldn't shake you, and couldn't beat you. Because beating you would have required beating the truth you reflected, and they never had the courage, discipline, or self-awareness to do that. You didn't just expose their weakness, you awakened it. And once exposed, they couldn't unsee it. That's when the battle ended. Number 10, they discovered, too late, that your boundaries were a warning, not a request. People who are used to getting their way always assume your boundaries are negotiable. They think you'll bend if they push hard enough, return if they ignore you long enough, or fold if they apply the right guilt at the right time. They misread your patience as permission, your kindness as compliance, and your silence as hesitation. They believed they had more influence over you than they actually did, and that belief was their downfall. When you started pulling back, they interpreted it as an emotional reaction instead of an intentional decision. They didn't realize you weren't distancing yourself to be dramatic. You were distancing yourself because you were done. Your withdrawal wasn't a plea for attention. It was an indication that your spirit was recalibrating. But people who are committed to misunderstanding you will always label your growth as moodiness, because it's easier to judge your actions than to acknowledge their role in causing them. When you went silent, they thought you were bluffing. Silence terrifies people who rely on chaos to maintain control. They expected you to argue, plead, over-explain, or chase after the connection just to restore peace. But your silence was your strength. It was your clarity. It was your final confirmation that the relationship, the friendship, or the situation had reached a point where your energy was no longer welcome, not by you, but by your purpose. And when you didn't return, that's when reality hit them. That's when the panic set in. They realized too late that your absence wasn't an emotional outburst. It was a verdict that stated clearly, this chapter is over, and I don't belong here anymore. By the time they understood your standards weren't flexible, the door had already closed, and not because you slammed it, but because destiny locked it. They learned the truth the hardest way possible. You don't set boundaries to control others. You set boundaries to protect the highest version of yourself. And once you walk away, you don't go back to what you had to heal from. Number 11, they fought for control, while you fought for clarity, and clarity always wins. They came at you with chess moves, but all their strategies were rooted in fear. Their actions were loud because their foundation was fragile. Everything they did was based on insecurity. Insecurity about losing relevance, losing influence, losing the version of you they could dictate, shape, or manipulate. They weren't fighting for the truth. They were fighting to maintain the illusion that they had power over you. But you weren't fighting for the same reason. You weren't battling for dominance. You were battling for direction. You weren't trying to win an argument. You were trying to win your alignment. You weren't trying to control the narrative. You were trying to understand God's narrative for your life. And that's why you're standing where they thought you would fall. Because while they were moving out of impulse, you were moving out of insight. While they were scrambling to maintain control, you were surrendering control to something higher. They were reacting to the moment. You were responding to your spirit. They were trying to force outcomes. You were waiting for revelation. They were guessing their next move. You were receiving yours. They didn't realize clarity is the most dangerous power a chosen one can hold. Clarity makes you immune to manipulation. Clarity makes you untouchable to confusion. Clarity makes you unstoppable in purpose. Whenever someone fights from insecurity, they exhaust themselves. Whenever someone fights from revelation, they elevate themselves. That's the difference. They were wrestling with shadows, their own fears, their own projections, their own unhealed wounds. And they tried to make you a target because they couldn't confront their truth. But you saw through it. You saw the motive behind the actions. You saw the energy behind the words. You saw the weakness behind the hostility. And once clarity hit, the battle ended, not because they surrendered, but because you stepped into a level where their fight no longer mattered. You can't be beaten by people who don't even understand why they're swinging in the first place. You left the ring. You rose above the frequency. You graduated from the lesson. Control collapses when clarity arrives, every single time. Number 12, you're impossible to defeat because you don't collapse under truth. You transform under it. Truth weakens people who have built their lives on denial, ego, and performance. But with you, truth does the complete opposite. It sharpens you. You've never been afraid of seeing yourself clearly, even when it was uncomfortable, even when it challenged your pride, even when it exposed the parts of you that needed discipline, healing, or growth. You didn't run from truth. You let it reshape you. And that's what turned you into someone no one can break. The people who tried to stand against you were terrified of truth. They treated honesty like a threat because it forced them to confront everything they avoid. Their insecurities, their patterns, their habits, their failures, their unhealed wounds. You became a problem to them, not because you were difficult, but because your relationship with truth exposed their relationship with lies. They couldn't handle the reflection that came from being around someone who isn't scared of accountability. And that's where your strength comes from, your willingness to face what others hide. Truth didn't embarrass you, it evolved you. When life showed you your mistakes, you corrected them. When life showed you your wounds, you healed them. When life showed you your weaknesses, you strengthened them. You're not undefeated because you're perfect. You're undefeated because you keep upgrading. You don't avoid the mirror, you use it. Every truth you walked through became a tool. Every hard fact became a foundation. Every difficult realization became a doorway into a better version of you. They couldn't beat you because they were fighting the old you while the real you kept advancing. You were always 10 steps ahead because truth kept promoting you to levels they refused to reach. And when someone is committed to their evolution, nobody can stop them, especially not people who are committed to staying the same. Your growth comes from honesty. Their downfall comes from avoidance. That alone makes the outcome predictable. A person who evolves through truth is impossible to defeat by someone who hides from it. Number 13. You didn't destroy them. Their obsession with you destroyed them. They weren't ruined by your success, your growth, or your glow. They were ruined by the fact that they made you their entire focus while you were busy focusing on your purpose. The moment they decided to compete with you, they put themselves in a self-inflicted war. They weren't battling you. They were battling their own insecurity, their own envy, their own fear of being forgotten or overshadowed. You didn't harm them. They harmed themselves by turning you into the standard they couldn't reach. What they never understood is that you were never running the same race. You weren't trying to win anything. You weren't performing for validation or chasing applause. You were improving quietly, aligning spiritually, and elevating internally. You were minding your path while they were minding your progress. And that alone drained them. Obsession always drains the one who holds it, never the one it's aimed at. Their downfall came from constantly measuring themselves against someone who was evolving for reasons they couldn't comprehend. You were growing because of purpose, but they thought you were growing because of them. They misread your evolution as competition instead of transformation, and that misunderstanding is what crushed them. Competing with someone who isn't competing back is a guaranteed path to exhaustion. Your existence exposed their limits. Your rise revealed their insecurities. Your consistency highlighted their lack of discipline. Your authenticity made their performance obvious. They weren't destroyed by you. They were destroyed by everything you reminded them of. You became a mirror they didn't want to look into, and instead of fixing the part of themselves that felt threatened, they tried to outrun it. But there's no finish line when the opponent lives in your own mind. Their obsession became their collapse. Their fixation became their downfall. Their need to watch you became the very thing that stopped them from watching themselves. They self-destructed trying to catch up to someone who wasn't even trying to be ahead. Number 14, they found out the hard way. That your destiny doesn't negotiate, it enforces. They spent so much time plotting around you, trying to block you, stall you, delay you, or bury you, not realizing they were fighting against something they never had jurisdiction over. They treated your rise like it was a vote, as if their opinions, alliances, or silent grudges could influence what was already written. They thought your elevation depended on their acceptance. They forgot destiny isn't a committee, it's a command. Your path wasn't built on their permission, and it never paused to consider their disapproval. Every time they tried to interfere, destiny didn't argue with them. It simply adjusted the route and kept pushing you forward. You weren't moving because people supported you. You were moving because the assignment over your life demanded motion. What was meant for you had its own momentum, and nothing they did could interrupt it. That's what they learned the hard way. Your breakthroughs weren't optional or negotiable. They were scheduled. They were structured. They were enforced by something far stronger than their envy. Every attempt they made to sabotage you only revealed how powerless they actually were. They kept trying to press pause on a life that had already been set to play. They kept trying to close doors that weren't even theirs to lock. Destiny doesn't wait for doubters to agree. It doesn't sit around hoping for fairness. It doesn't bend itself to accommodate people who resent your calling. It removes them, quietly, strategically, permanently. And when people get removed, it's never personal, it's procedural. The assignment comes first. Your victories hit harder because they weren't the result of manipulation, approval, or luck. They were the result of alignment. You're carried by something that sees further, knows more, and moves with precision. While they were busy trying to beat you, destiny was busy placing you. They didn't lose because you defeated them. They lost because destiny defended you. And nothing, and absolutely nothing, can overpower what's already been ordered. Conclusion. Chosen one. Everything you've read and experienced in this journey points to one undeniable truth. You were never designed to be ordinary, and no one has the power to define your limits but you. Every attack, every doubt cast against you, every attempt to control or manipulate you only revealed something extraordinary. That your strength, your growth, and your destiny are beyond the reach of ordinary interference. You've walked through fire and became the flame. You've transformed under truth while others collapsed in denial. You've evolved in silence while others depended on noise. Every challenge that was meant to break you only refined you. Every boundary you set, every step you took, every moment you chose clarity over chaos, you proved that your life cannot be measured by anyone else's perception of power. You've been tested by people who underestimated you, doubted you, and tried to cage your spirit. They assumed humility meant helplessness, silence meant weakness, and absence meant defeat. Yet every misjudgment, every attempt to weaponize your past, and every effort to stop your rise only confirmed one thing. You operate on a level they cannot access, fueled by alignment, integrity, and purpose, not by ego, approval, or temporary advantage. Your victories aren't optional, your breakthroughs aren't dependent on their cooperation, and your destiny doesn't negotiate, it enforces. And that's why you cannot be beaten. You are untouchable because your strength comes from mastery over yourself, and your rise comes from forces they can't even see, let alone influence. This is more than survival. This is transformation. Every loss they suffered in trying to challenge you, every moment of panic they experienced at your consistency, every crack that appeared in their armor because of your presence. It was never about them, and it was never about defeating you. It was about revealing the depth of your power, your alignment, and your calling. You are a living testament that true strength doesn't scream. It sustains. True power doesn't manipulate, it commands silently. True victory doesn't need witnesses, it enforces destiny. So rise with confidence, stand with purpose, walk boldly knowing that every step forward is a step no one can take from you. Your journey is divinely protected, divinely orchestrated, and unstoppable. If this message resonated with your spirit, make sure you like this video, comment your thoughts below, share it with someone who needs to hear this, and subscribe to the channel so you never miss the next message designed to elevate, empower, and awaken the chosen one in you. Your presence here is not by accident. It's a part of your growth, and we're just getting started. God bless you.
Some people don't look for you. They orbit you, like planets quietly terrified of the gravitational pull they pretend doesn't exist. That's the strange thing about being a chosen one. People swear they've moved on, healed, grown, evolved, found new friends, found new lovers. Yet somehow your name keeps slipping out of their mouths like a reflex they can't control. It's almost scientific at this point. Studies show the human brain remembers emotionally charged encounters up to 4 times longer than ordinary ones, which explains why folks who claim they don't care about you suddenly turn into full-time reporters, asking for updates they have no business requesting. They're not curious about your life. They're trying to manage the emotional bruise you left simply by existing. And here's where it gets entertaining. Having feelings for you has become their own private survival sport. They treat affection like it's a hazardous activity, something that requires protective gear and emergency exit plans. You didn't break their heart, you broke their emotional algorithms. You made their internal wiring glitch like a cheap smartphone overheating during Harmattan. The moment they caught feelings, something inside them whispered, "Uh-oh, we don't have the software to handle this level of truth." Because let's be honest, you weren't a crush, you were a plot twist. You showed up with depth, clarity, intuition, self-respect, quiet confidence, spiritual weight, attributes they only encounter in self-help books they never finish. And instead of admitting you shook them, they disguise their fascination with casual check-ins. Have you seen them lately? Are they doing okay? Did they ever say anything about me? Meanwhile, they're pretending they're just asking out of concern, but we both know they're performing emotional CPR on feelings they swear they buried. And the funniest part? These same people will tell everyone they're over you with the same enthusiasm a bad liar uses when saying, "Trust me, I'm fine." Yet they whisper your name like it has spiritual consequences, because it does. This is why the story you're about to hear matters, not because you wanted their attention, but because your energy marked them in ways they can't fully explain. Your presence rewrote their emotional script so thoroughly that even their curiosity is scared of how much it still wants you. So sit back, because once you understand why everyone keeps asking about you, why feelings for you feel like a psychological roller coaster, and why half these people are still recovering from emotional motion sickness, you'll never doubt your impact again. Number 1. They're not asking about you. They're checking if you're still unsafe for their comfort zone. People aren't casually curious about you the way they ask about the weather or last week's gossip. When your name comes up, there's a tension behind it, an urgency they try to dress up as harmless interest. The truth is, your existence disrupted a comfort zone they spent years building, and they're checking to see if you're still capable of shaking it again. They want updates not because they care, but because they need reassurance that the version of you they struggled with isn't getting any stronger, wiser, or harder to ignore. They need to know if the very energy that exposed their fears is still alive and active. You became a reference point for their self-awareness. You revealed their habits, their insecurities, their emotional shortcuts, their inconsistencies. You forced them to admit things to themselves they were never planning to admit. That kind of impact doesn't fade. It lingers. Even when they pretend they've moved on, their spirit still reacts at the mention of your growth. So they keep tabs, trying to measure if your evolution will require them to finally evolve too. Most people never acknowledged how much pressure your presence put on their illusions. They didn't know how to handle someone who didn't fall for their charm, excuses, or rehearsed personalities. You were the first person to make them question the stories they told themselves about who they are. That's why they're still circling back. Not to check on your health, success, or happiness, but to see if the mirror you held up to their life is still shining as brightly as it did before. What they won't admit is that part of them hopes you've dimmed. They hope you've slowed down, gotten distracted, or become more manageable. But deep down, they're afraid you've only become more aligned, more focused, more grounded in who you are. Because every version of you they hear about reminds them how much of their own potential they've been avoiding. So when people ask about you, understand this. They're not tracking your life. They're tracking the impact you had on theirs, and they still aren't ready to face what you showed them. Number 2, feeling something for you is dangerous, because it forces them to abandon their mask. When people catch feelings for a chosen one, it isn't just a crush or a passing interest. It's a seismic shift in their inner world. Most people spend their lives wearing masks. They craft personalities, rehearse behaviors, and maintain facades that make them seem confident, put together, and in control. These masks protect them from being seen too clearly, from being vulnerable, from confronting the parts of themselves they don't want anyone else to notice. When they start to feel for you, the mask starts to slip, often without them even realizing it. Suddenly, all the rehearsed lines, the calculated moves, and the safe emotional distance become useless. You make them confront emotions they thought they had neatly contained. You aren't dangerous because you manipulate or chase. You're dangerous because your presence demands honesty. People feel compelled to drop the act they've perfected because you don't react to superficial performances. You respond to truth, integrity, and authenticity, which means any mask they wear becomes painfully visible. That's why feelings for you feel overwhelming. They expose not just affection, but inadequacy, fear, and the parts of themselves they've been running from. You force them to see themselves in ways that are uncomfortable and unavoidable. The pressure of this exposure is something most people aren't equipped to handle. They've spent years rehearsing how to navigate life without confronting their own flaws, insecurities, or unfinished growth. Liking you disrupts all of that. It forces them to consider, can they actually be real with someone who won't settle for anything less than their full, unfiltered self? The answer terrifies them because it doesn't come with easy compromises. You don't fit into their scripts, and their emotions no longer follow predictable patterns. At its core, their danger is entirely about control. You don't give them the luxury of pretending they're fine or that their feelings are casual. You demand authenticity, even if you never ask for it. That's why being felt for by a chosen one is a risk. It's not about you. It's about them being forced to meet a version of themselves they've been avoiding for far too long. It's a confrontation with their truth, and that confrontation is what they secretly fear the most. Number 3, you trigger attachments. They don't know how to manage. Being around a chosen one isn't like being around anyone else. Most people are used to relationships and connections that are easy, predictable, and safe. They know how to manage the energy of those around them because it fits into the patterns they've learned. Chasing when needed, retreating when threatened, keeping things light when things feel heavy. Then you arrive, and suddenly nothing behaves the way they expect. You're whole, self-contained, and untouchable by the usual tactics. You trigger attachments that are not designed to exist, and that's terrifying for them. Their emotional responses become unpredictable because you operate on a level they haven't encountered. When they feel drawn to you, it's not just attraction. They are caught in a space where their usual scripts don't work. They can't control your reactions, manipulate your attention, or predict the next move. That kind of attachment is new territory for them. It's uncomfortable, it's confusing, and it's almost paralyzing. They feel drawn to you, but they're simultaneously afraid of how much that pull could demand from them emotionally. Being attached to you forces them to face emotions they've spent a lifetime avoiding. Vulnerability, accountability, clarity, and deep introspection. You activate an internal pressure they can't shrug off. Even when they try to distract themselves or rationalize their feelings, your presence reminds them that they can't settle for the shallow bonds they've relied on in the past. The pull you create isn't optional. It's magnetic, relentless, and impossible to ignore. What makes it even more unsettling is that they know, consciously or not, that their attachment will demand growth. Liking you isn't like liking someone who lets them coast. It's like staring at a doorway to a life they could have but haven't earned yet. The attachment feels dangerous because it forces them to confront their own limitations, their patterns of avoidance, and the truth that they're not equipped for the depth you represent. You aren't just a person in their life, you're a challenge to everything they thought they knew about themselves, and that is the kind of connection most people cannot handle. Number 4, they know if they fall for you, they can't control the outcome. Most people enter relationships like they're stepping onto a stage. They know their lines, their expressions, their cues. They know which emotional buttons to press, which patterns to repeat, and how to position themselves so they never feel too exposed. With you, none of that works. You don't move based on fear, guilt, pressure, or flattery. You don't react to manipulation, and you don't get emotionally cornered by people's tactics. Your independence ruins their script, and that alone is enough to make them feel unsafe in ways they've never experienced. They're used to dealing with people who fold easily, who confuse attention with affection, who accept half effort and call it love. They're used to being able to predict reactions and control outcomes. But when they catch feelings for you, they quickly realize they're stepping into territory where their strategies are useless. You aren't controlled by neediness or fear of loss. You don't operate from desperation. You won't fight for a connection that isn't mutual, and you don't chase anyone trying to play hard to get. To them, this feels like a loss of power they can't compensate for. Liking you forces them to accept an uncomfortable truth. The outcome isn't in their hands anymore. You can't be tricked into choosing them. You can't be guilted into staying. You can't be flattered into ignoring your standards. And because they can't influence the direction of things, vulnerability becomes unavoidable. For someone who lives off emotional control, that vulnerability feels like standing unprotected in the middle of a storm. That's why their feelings for you feel overwhelming. They realize that if they fall without safety nets. They can't predict where things will go, They can't shape you to fit their comfort zone, and they can't script the ending. You disrupt the false sense of power they've been holding on to for years, and even if they're drawn to you, the fear of losing that control keeps them trapped between wanting you deeply and running from the emotional risk you represent. With you, they can't perform. They can only be real. And that's a level of emotional exposure they've never prepared for. Number 5. Your authenticity makes their entire relationship history look like a lie. When people cross paths with someone as genuine as you, something uncomfortable happens inside them. They start comparing. Not because they want to, but because your presence forces it. Your honesty, your emotional clarity, your depth, your consistency, all of it highlights the gaps they've been pretending didn't exist in their past relationships. Suddenly, everything they once called meaningful starts to look flimsy. Every connection they once bragged about starts to feel shallow. Every love story they told themselves begins to sound more like a coping mechanism than a real bond. You didn't intend to expose anything, but your authenticity quietly holds a light over everything they've been avoiding. People who've been operating on emotional shortcuts don't know how to handle someone who loves or connects without manipulation, agenda, or performance. They've built entire histories on half-presence and temporary attachments, situationships, convenience bonds, addictions disguised as romance, and relationships where emotional crumbs were considered meals. Then you show up not as a savior, but simply as yourself. And yourself makes all their past behavior feel outdated and dishonest. Not because you said anything, but because you lived at a level they didn't know was possible. This is why they grow uncomfortable. Not with you, but with themselves. You activate a kind of inner truth they were never prepared to face. Your presence makes them recognize how much settling they've done, how much pretending they've normalized, and how emotionally malnourished they've been all along. Their old relationships weren't love. They were distractions from the loneliness they refused to acknowledge. And that's where the resentment comes in. They don't resent you for being real. They resent that being around you forces them to see how unreal their past connections were. You didn't ruin anything for them. You simply revealed the difference between emotional survival and emotional fulfillment. And for the first time, they see how much of their love life was built on fear, convenience, ego, or routine. Your authenticity didn't destroy their history. It exposed the truth of it. And that truth is something they can no longer unsee. Number 6, you're the only person they couldn't emotionally predict. People build their confidence on predictability. They study how others react, memorize patterns, learn what triggers attention, what triggers guilt, what triggers fear, and they use that information to feel in control. It becomes part of their identity. This belief that they can read people, influence people, and make things go the way they want. But when they met you, all of that fell apart. You didn't fit into any emotional pattern they were familiar with. Nothing they tried worked the way they expected. You became the first person who didn't respond to their usual emotional choreography, and it shook them. You didn't react when they tried to test you. You didn't fall apart when they pulled back to see if you'd chase. You didn't lose your dignity when they attempted to provoke insecurity. You didn't crumble when they tried to assert dominance. Instead, you remained steady, self-governed, grounded. You moved based on inner truth, not emotional manipulation. That alone threw them off balance, because they had never encountered someone whose reactions came from self-respect rather than emotional imbalance. Your emotional stability made their tactics useless. They couldn't make you jealous the way they could with others. They couldn't confuse you. They couldn't lure you into drama just to feel needed or important. They couldn't get a predictable rise out of you. You kept your peace even when they expected chaos. You maintained your value even when they expected desperation. In their eyes, You broke the rules of engagement. What unsettled them most wasn't that they couldn't control you, it was that they couldn't measure you. They couldn't figure out what you wanted, what you feared, or what part of you they could hook into. You became an emotional outlier, someone who didn't operate from wounds, but from awareness. Someone who didn't respond to pressure, but to principle. And that kind of unpredictability isn't random, it's power. This is why feelings for you feel unnerving to them. You disrupt the entire identity they built around being emotionally in control. The moment they realized they couldn't predict you, they also realized they couldn't manage the connection. And that loss of emotional power is something they've never had to face until you. Number 7, their attraction to you isn't romantic, it's evolutionary. When people feel drawn to you, it goes far beyond chemistry or admiration. You stir something in them that has nothing to do with butterflies and everything to do with awakening. Your presence activates parts of them they've ignored, abandoned, or didn't even know existed. You bring out their conscience in moments they'd rather remain careless. You heighten their self-awareness when they'd prefer to stay blind. You wake up their desire for purpose when they've been content drifting. And that kind of pull isn't romantic, it's transformational. Most people live in emotional autopilot. They repeat the same habits, the same fears, the same excuses. Their relationships stay surface level because surface level doesn't demand growth. But when they encounter someone with depth, intention, self-respect, and spiritual grounding, something inside them shifts. You make them aware of a better version of themselves, one they've never stepped into. It's not that they're falling for you, they're falling for the possibility of who they could be if they rose to meet your energy. The attraction is a signal, a reminder that they've been playing small. But evolution always comes with discomfort. It requires honesty. It requires taking accountability for patterns they've used for years. It requires letting go of the identities they've built to survive. It requires emotional work, patience, humility, and a willingness to face the truth. Most people aren't ready for that level of transformation. So instead of admitting that you inspire growth, they panic and label the feeling dangerous, because growth feels dangerous to the unprepared. You don't just affect their heart, you affect their direction. You make them rethink their choices, their standards, their relationships, their behaviors. They start questioning why they accepted so little from themselves and from others. You push them toward alignment, even when they resist it. And deep down, they know that getting close to you would require them to change in ways they've avoided their entire lives. So they're attracted to you, but intimidated by what that attraction demands. It's not romance that scares them, it's evolution. You represent the bridge between who they are and who they could be. And crossing that bridge takes courage most people haven't built yet. Number 8. You make people realize how small they've been living. Most people move through life inside invisible boxes, boxes built from fear, routine, approval, and the need to stay comfortable. They surround themselves with people who won't challenge them, situations that won't stretch them, and habits that keep everything predictable. It's not that they're incapable of more, it's that they've gotten used to living on emotional autopilot. Then you step into the picture, and suddenly the walls around them start to feel too close. You don't lecture them, you don't push them, you don't demand anything. You simply operate at a level of honesty and self-respect that makes them feel the limits of their own lives. You live from a place of truth, not performance. You make decisions based on conviction, not convenience. You choose peace over drama, growth over comfort, alignment over popularity. And watching someone live like that exposes an uncomfortable truth. They've been settling in their relationships, settling in their self-worth, settling in their dreams, settling in who they allow themselves to become. Your lifestyle doesn't shame them. It simply reveals what they could be if they weren't so afraid of expanding. Your presence becomes a silent comparison, not because you're trying to outshine anyone, but because you naturally illuminate the things they've been avoiding. They start to realize how often they shrink themselves, how much potential they've wasted, how many excuses they've rehearsed, how many versions of themselves they've never even attempted to explore. And this realization creates a mix of admiration and discomfort. They're drawn to you because you represent a bigger life, but that bigger life demands courage they haven't yet built. This is why they keep asking about you. They're tracking your growth because it reflects what their growth could look like. They measure your evolution as a way of gauging their own capacity. They want to know how far someone can go when they stop living small. They want to know if expansion is real, if purpose is real, if alignment is worth it, if authenticity pays off. They're not just curious about you. They're curious about the version of themselves they might become if they stopped hiding behind fear. You don't intimidate them with your presence. You confront them with their potential. And that's a truth too powerful for them to ignore. Number 9. You're the first person who never needed them, so they didn't know how to love you. The truth that people don't like to admit is this. Most relationships aren't built on love. They're built on emotional transactions. I give you validation. You give me attention. I rescue you so you stay loyal. I support you so you don't outgrow me. Most people only know how to bond through imbalance, not equality. They're comfortable only when one person is the helper and the other is the needy one. It makes them feel relevant. It makes them feel powerful. It gives them an identity they can control. Then you walked in, a chosen one, self-generated, self-sourced, stable without their reassurance, whole without their attention, grounded without their emotional scaffolding. Suddenly, their entire relationship blueprint collapsed. They didn't know how to love someone who wasn't looking to be saved. They didn't know how to approach someone who wasn't addicted to drama. They didn't know how to impress someone who already had internal peace. You were the first person in their life who didn't come with emotional holes they could fill, and that terrified them. Because when someone doesn't need you, your only chance at keeping them is to show up as your real self, not your controlling self. Your honest self, not your strategic self. Your healed self, not your manipulative self. And that is the part they're not ready for. Your presence forced them to confront this uncomfortable truth. They don't know how to love without having power. They don't know how to be in a relationship where emotions aren't a survival weapon. They don't know how to connect with someone who doesn't operate from fear, insecurity, or dependency. You weren't intimidating because you were too strong. You were intimidating because you didn't require them to play the roles they've always used to feel important. With you, they had nothing to fix, nothing to teach, nothing to save, nothing to manage. So instead of learning how to love you, they panicked. They misread your strength as disinterest. They misinterpreted your independence as rejection. They confused your emotional clarity with emotional coldness. The truth is simple. They weren't prepared for a connection that didn't rely on imbalance. You weren't a challenge. They've had plenty of challenges. You were a mirror that revealed how unprepared they were for a real, mature, power-free connection. And that's why you felt different to them. Not because you were hard to get, but because you were impossible to control. Number 10. They're afraid you'll see through their attraction and into their motivations. Most people are comfortable being admired, desired, wanted, but only on a surface level. They can handle someone liking their face, their charm, their aura. What they can't handle is someone who can see the source code behind their attraction. And that's exactly what you do. You don't just pick up on energy, you decode it. You read people like ancient texts, not modern scripts. Their tone, their silence, their inconsistencies, their patterns. You understand motives they haven't even admitted to themselves. So when someone feels attracted to you, the fear isn't, do they like me back? The fear is, what will they see if they look too deeply at me? Because you don't just see the feeling, you see the reason behind the feeling, and that terrifies people. You'll know if they're drawn to you because you see the difference instantly. Most people have never been loved for who they truly are, only for the role they play. But with you, there are no roles, no masks, no curated version of themselves to hide behind. Your presence forces them into emotional honesty they didn't ask for and aren't prepared to practice. To be close to you means being seen, and most people aren't ready for that level of exposure, because they know you'll notice. You don't shame them, but your discernment strips away every excuse they've used as identity. You're the first person they can't finesse, can't confuse, can't mislead, can't perform for. So their feelings for you stay half-expressed, distorted, conflicted. They admire you, but they avoid you. They're drawn in, but they pull back. They want you, but they fear the version of themselves they'd have to confront to have you. You're not dangerous because you can see through people. You're dangerous because you can see into them, all the way down to their motivations, their wounds, their intentions, their shadows. Most people would rather worship you quietly from a distance than stand in front of someone who reads them like scripture and reflects back who they really are. Number 11. You make them confront the unlived life they've been avoiding. There are people who go years, sometimes decades, without ever examining their choices. They keep themselves busy with noise, drama, entertainment, temporary people, and shallow connections, convincing themselves that this is what life is supposed to feel like. Then you arrive, not with pressure or demands, but with a presence that exposes everything they've been avoiding. Your energy doesn't push them, it reflects them, and what they see in that reflection is the version of themselves they never had the courage to step into. Your consistency brings their excuses into question. Your clarity interrupts their confusion. Your emotional maturity reveals how much they've been settling. It doesn't matter if you speak it or not. Your very existence makes them feel the difference between a life lived consciously and a life lived on autopilot. They suddenly realize how much potential they've buried just to stay comfortable. It's unsettling, almost painful, because they've spent so long keeping certain truths hidden from themselves. But being around you makes those truths louder, clearer, and harder to run from. Feelings for you aren't just romantic, they are confrontational. They force a moment of reckoning. If I want someone like this, I can't keep being who I've been. That's where the fear comes in. Being close to you would require upgrading their habits, their thinking, their emotional discipline, and even their goals. They'd have to stop numbing themselves with people who don't challenge them. They'd have to give up the false peace that comes from avoiding growth. They'd have to face their trauma, their patterns, their inertia. You represent the life they could have had if they didn't waste so much time running from discomfort. You don't judge them for it. You don't even call it out. But they feel it. They feel the difference between your depth and their distractions. And instead of rising to meet that standard, many retreat. They label the feeling dangerous because it threatens the identity built on avoidance. Loving you would require them to retire every emotional shortcut they've been using to survive. It would require courage they haven't practiced yet. So they admire you, fear you, desire you, and avoid you all at once. Because the truth is simple. You are the reminder of everything they could have been if they hadn't been hiding from themselves for so long. Number 12. They keep asking about you. Because you left a psychological imprint, not a memory. There are people who pass through someone's life and leave nothing but a story. Then there are people like you, the ones who leave structure, alignment, and internal shift. You don't leave memories, you leave echoes that reshape how a person thinks, chooses, and sees themselves. That's why people keep asking about you long after the connection has faded. They aren't trying to stay updated on your life. They're trying to understand the aftershocks you triggered inside theirs. A memory sits in the mind. An imprint sits in the psyche. And imprints don't fade with time. They integrate. When people met you, something in them recalibrated. Their self-worth, their standards, their emotional tolerance, their expectations, it all rearranged itself without their conscious permission. You didn't guide them through a transformation. You activated it simply by being who you are. Most of your impact wasn't even verbal. It was energetic and behavioral. You changed the way they interpret sincerity. You changed the way they recognize manipulation. You changed what they accept and what they refuse. You became a reference point they can't unsee, even if they wish they could. The uncomfortable truth is that your absence teaches louder than your presence. You are the kind of person whose silence hits harder than most people's affection. When you walked away, it didn't create a void. It revealed the void they'd been ignoring. Suddenly, everything in their life felt too basic, too shallow, too poorly assembled. They realized that they weren't missing you. They were missing the version of themselves they glimpsed when you were around. That's why they keep asking about you through mutuals, online circles, or whispered conversations. They're checking the progress of the transformation you activated in them, trying to see if the internal shift they felt was real or just a moment. They want to know if you're still growing because your growth determines whether their excuses still hold weight. You weren't just a phase. They reorganized parts of themselves around your presence, and now they measure their growth against the standard you unknowingly set. They don't miss you. They miss the person they started becoming because of you, and they keep asking about you because the imprint you left refuses to be forgotten. Number 13. They're afraid that if they let you in, you'll never fit back into the box they built for their life. People spend years, sometimes their whole lives, building a version of themselves that feels safe, predictable, and manageable. They choose friendships that don't challenge them, routines that don't stretch them, and partners who don't expose their emotional blind spots. Everything stays neatly arranged inside a psychological box where nothing grows too big, nothing digs too deep, and nothing forces them to face who they could be if they stopped playing small. Then you come along, someone who doesn't fit into any pre-made category. You carry too much truth, too much awareness, too much presence to be contained. Liking you doesn't feel simple to them. It feels architectural. It threatens the entire construction of their identity. You aren't a nice addition to their life. You're a catalyst. You don't blend in. You shift the gravity. And they sense that. They can feel that letting you in would disrupt the habits, patterns, and relationships they've used as emotional scaffolding. The way they communicate would have to evolve. The way they handle conflict would have to improve. The people they tolerate would no longer make sense. The excuses they've leaned on would fall apart. Being close to you would require them to upgrade their whole operating system. Most people aren't ready for that kind of restructuring. They want affection without transformation, connection without introspection, attraction without accountability. But you can't exist in someone's life without activating something bigger than their comfort zone. You don't allow stagnation, not because you push, but because your energy exposes everything that's out of alignment. They instinctively know that once you enter their world, nothing can go back to being small or ordinary. You'd stretch their thinking, deepen their emotional capacity, and unravel the lies they've been telling themselves just to stay comfortable. That's the real danger, not losing you, but losing the life they've been hiding inside. You don't fit into the box they built. You break the box by existing, and they know once you expand their world, they will never be able to shrink it again. They're not afraid of your love. They're afraid of who they'd have to become to deserve it. Number 14. They ask about you because every version of you after they lost access is a reminder of what they couldn't handle. When someone loses access to a chosen one, they don't just lose a person. They lose the doorway to a higher version of themselves. And that loss doesn't fade quietly. It echoes, it lingers, it follows them into every update, every rumor, every glimpse of who you're becoming without them. So when they ask about you, it's not nostalgia, it's surveillance. They're monitoring the aftermath of their own emotional immaturity. They told themselves you were too much, too intense, too different, but as time passed, the truth became unavoidable. You weren't overwhelming. They were unprepared. You weren't complicated. They were unequipped. You weren't asking for more. They were offering less. And now, every piece of information they hear about your life feels like a report card they can't avoid reading. Your evolution exposes the parts of themselves they refused to evolve when they had the chance. It hits harder because your growth isn't loud or staged. It's natural. It's happening because you kept moving, kept healing, kept choosing yourself. You didn't crumble when they walked away. You didn't cling to the version of you that they failed to understand. You expanded, and the expansion mocks their excuses. Every new achievement, new glow, new chapter, new alignment makes them realize something devastating. They weren't rejecting you. They were rejecting the responsibility of rising to meet you. And that realization burns more than heartbreak ever could. Seeing you thrive without them dismantles the narrative they created to feel comfortable. They can't tell themselves you were dramatic when now you're peaceful. They can't tell themselves you were unstable when now you're focused. They can't tell themselves you were demanding when now you're aligned with people who gladly give what they withheld. So they keep asking about you as a way to measure the consequences of their avoidance. They're not trying to reconnect. They're trying to figure out how far you've risen beyond the version of life they settled for. They're not curious about your journey. They're haunted by the realization that they lost access to someone they were never going to outgrow, but who was always destined to outgrow them. And the sting isn't that you left. The sting is that you flourished the moment they weren't there to hold you back. Conclusion. Every encounter you've had as a chosen one leaves more than a memory. It leaves a psychological footprint, an internal shift, a recalibration of anyone who crosses your path. People don't just feel you, they confront you. You expose patterns they've been hiding behind, dreams they've been postponing, fears they've been ignoring, and the parts of themselves they've been too afraid to meet. Every time someone mentions your name, it isn't idle curiosity. It's their subconscious measuring the impact you had on their psyche, the growth they avoided, and the evolution they're still too hesitant to embrace. Being around a chosen one isn't easy for anyone who isn't willing to meet themselves honestly. Your presence forces accountability, authenticity, and emotional clarity. It doesn't ask, it simply reflects, and reflection is not comfortable. They are drawn to you because your energy awakens something dormant within them, their conscience, their standards, their desire for purpose, their capacity for real connection, but they fear it at the same time. They fear it because evolution is never gentle and growth is never convenient. You didn't ask for them to change, you simply embodied what is possible, and that in itself became an undeniable mirror. Every feeling they have for you, every pang of admiration, every trace of fear, every hidden longing, is a reflection of their own potential and their own unpreparedness. They are fascinated, terrified, and sometimes resentful, not because of anything you did, but because you cannot be controlled, manipulated, or contained. Your existence in their lives is a quiet revolution, and it leaves them scrambling to understand what they can't influence and can't undo. They know instinctively that once someone like you enters their orbit, nothing about their world can remain the same. So if you've ever wondered why people keep asking about you, why their attention feels intense, why their attraction feels dangerous, understand this. It's not about you. It's about the truths they cannot face and the growth they haven't embraced. You are a catalyst, a mirror, a force they can neither predict nor manage, and that is your power. That is your mark. That is why being a chosen one is not just about who you are. It's about the unavoidable awakening you bring to everyone around you. If this resonates with you, make sure you subscribe to the channel for more insights that will unlock the hidden dynamics in your life. Don't forget to like this video if it gave you clarity, comment below to share your experiences, and share it with others who need to understand the impact a chosen one has on the world. Your story, your power, and your awakening deserve to be witnessed. God bless you.